Anyway, let's move on to the European Union. What's going on?
We're coming for them. We're coming for your children.
Oh dear. Well, look, the European Union, time and time again, pushing a woke ideology on the rest of the world. But I've got to say, this one really takes the cake because now they're considering new proposals, which would mean that children are allowed to choose their own gender. You heard that correct. Children would be able to choose their own gender, and member states would be able to be punished for challenging gender ideology. Now, you heard that right. Now, this is part of the European Commission's new LGBTIQ plus equality strategy for the next couple of years. And I want to share with you some of the highlights of what they're proposing. Firstly, any age limits on gender recognition could be scrapped, and therapy to check whether children want to change their gender would be outlawed. So therefore, if a child is confused, questioning their own gender, then it doesn't matter. You don't have to go and see a therapist. You don't have to go and see a GP. It would be very easy for a child to go, I'm a boy, but actually I think I'm a girl. Boom, that's it. 2, it suggests blocking funds from discriminating regions and supports the strengthening of equality bodies. So what if a member state says, no, I don't agree with this plan, oh, well, we're going to block your funds, you're going to be punished for that. And it also suggests a ban on talking therapy for children suffering from gender issues. Now, look, I'm really, really worried about this, to be honest. This sets a very dangerous precedent because what it does is it says, parents, mum and dad, you've got no say in what happens here. When a child who can barely read or write, could be any age child, can barely read or write, can't vote, can't drive, but suddenly is able to make an adult decision to change their bodies and cause irreparable damage, and you don't know what's going to happen later on in life. This is extremely dangerous. The consequences for children are particularly bad. But what on earth is the European Commission doing? And my concern is that countries around the world would follow suit. Now, obviously, this has to go through a process, but we are already seeing this sort of gender ideology starting in Australia, and who's not to say it could go further? Look what's happening, again, only in Victoria. You've got this program that Jacinta Allen implemented, whereby a teacher can ask a child, if you don't feel like you're a boy, you don't feel like you're a girl, that's all right, you can question your own gender. I mean, the ideology has started. And if this is going on now in the European Union, where children are going to be able to pick their gender, Caleb, where does it end?
Well, how smart do the POMs look right now, having pulled out of the European Union, right? Because it's, like the business about saying, oh, well, children can choose their gender, we've heard it before, and it is sick. But when you then add on that you're going to use the long arm of the law and the funding that you give to nations to say, well, you either fall into line or you lose money, I mean, you're at a coercive point there where you're saying you just have to adhere to gender ideology, there's no questioning, we get rid of recognised forms of therapy, you have to fall into line or we'll take your money away. I mean, that is insane. And particularly, I can't believe, and yes, this has to go through a process of ratification if it's to come in, there's in all likelihood it won't get passed, and I hope that that is the case. But the fact that this would even be put up before the European Union, when most of the Western world has started to wake up to where gender ideology is at, and that we have gone too hard for too long, and that harm has been caused. The Cass report out of the UK, most of the world is actually turning the dial down on this stuff, and the European Union is turning around and saying, well, actually, maybe we should ratchet it up. That is insane.
Yeah, and the other element of the report was they have a whole section dedicated to combating transphobia online through combating disinformation about LGBTQ stuff, all that they're now empowered to do under their Digital Services Act, which essentially gives the European Union huge powers to coerce social media giants to take things down at their will, much like what we've seen now in Australia with our e-safety commissioner. And that's where this is all headed, really, because the general population does not support this, even if you're not a conservative. This is not left or right. This is common sense versus insanity. So how do they convince the population to go along with it? through censorship. And the report's very clear about that. It's all about combating disinformation. But if I were a parent in the European Union right now, I'd be packing my kids up and leaving, because that is terrifying. You could now be facing the prospect of setting them off to school, and then they come back and say, Mum, Dad, haven't been to therapy, haven't seen a doctor, haven't done anything, but I'm now a boy.
Yeah. But at least, at least the UK had that court decision a couple of months ago whereby, an adult woman was actually defined. You can actually define the sexes. But here in Australia, we don't know what a woman is. I mean, our own Sex Discrimination Commissioner this week in the Senate estimates, she couldn't even define the difference between a biological man and a biological woman. And this is where it starts to get very on edge, when the definitions in law, they're not clearly defined, even though why we need laws to even define it.
Why do you need a court to tell
Why do you need a court to tell you? But once that ideology starts, it doesn't end.